Students, here are some models of carbon methane, and this model is called as ball and stick model, and this is the space filling model. In the previous period, we have studied the structural model of methane. Now, let us study the next point, that is carbon, a versatile element. Why carbon is called as versatile element? We considered in the beginning of the period that each and every object that surrounds us, except the glass, soil, and the metal material, all material, they consist of carbon. The main thing that carbon can form the strong covalent bond. Other elements also can form the covalent compounds, but still there is a difference between the other elements and the carbon elements. Carbon can form a variety of compounds with its special characteristic or special remarkable property that is called as the catenation. Once again, let us revise that what type of compounds of carbon are there. The clothes or clothing that we wear, the various foodstuffs that we eat, the fuels that we use, all these contain the carbon. And there are many important properties that enables the carbon to form the many compounds. Means you can find that the total animal kingdom or the living kingdom, that is made up of carbon compounds. Even our body is also made up of carbon. And it forms from very small as simple structure of methane to the gigantic structure that is we can call as the structure of DNA. So carbon forms the bonding with the carbon compounds and other elements also, and this remarkable property is called as the catenation. So catenation is the direct bonding of carbon-carbon atoms or carbon with the another elements, that is called as the catenation. And this remarkable unique property of carbon that enables to form the variety of carbon compounds. And so there is a tremendous compounds, or there is a big number of carbon compounds. This is the first and important property, and so we call that carbon is as a versatile element. The next important, that is the first that property, as we discussed, that catenation is a unique ability to form strong covalent bonds with other carbon atoms, and this results in the formation of big molecules. The next important, that is the carbon can form the, and it is bonded by the with the different elements. First we can say that carbon bonds with the carbon and form the single bond. Then second, double bond and the triple bond. Here are some examples of carbon-carbon double single bond as a ethane, carbon-carbon double bond as a ethene, and carbon-carbon triple bond, that is ethyne. The third one, the important third point, that is the tetravalency. Tetravalency means the carbon has the 4 electrons in its outermost shell, that is called as the tetravalency. So carbon is called as tetravalent, and with this it can form variety of compounds. Means from a single carbon atom 5 compounds can be formed. First, that is methane. If one hydrogen atom is replaced and one chlorine atom is added, then it will form CH3Cl, that is the chloromethane. Then next, CH2Cl2. If the second hydrogen atom is replaced by the chlorine, CHCl3, and if all the 4 hydrogen atoms are replaced by chlorine, that is the carbon tetrachloride. So it can form the various compounds. The next important, that is the isomerism. Isomerism means the compounds having the different structural formula, but they have the same molecular form. So there are various isomers of carbon atoms. So it is very important that why the carbon atom can form a big number of compounds. The reason, that is the main remarkable property, that is of catenation, means carbon can form the chains. Now here again there are the open chain and the closed chain compounds. Open chain, straight chains are there, then branch chains are there, and in the closed chain there are ring structure compounds. So it can form variety of compounds. Next important, that is the carbon-carbon can bonded by the single bond, double bond and triple bond, means there are three bonds available to share the elements. Next important, that is the tetravalency, and last is the isomerism. So we can form that if you consider the strength or the number of the compounds, that all other elements form a certain number and only the carbon can form that number. So it is very important, and so we call the carbon as a versatile element.
There's a huge variety of carbon compounds, and different categories of carbon compounds. Of course, you mustn't have heard of all these terms yet, but we will study about all these varieties of carbon compounds and why carbon forms so many compounds in this chapter. The name of this chapter is the versatile nature of carbon. The word versatile actually means, one person or one substance which can do many things at once. If a writer can write, he can direct films, he can sing songs, if he can act, in that case he's a versatile person. Carbon forms so many compounds in so many different ways that it's called versatile. Let's learn more about the versatile nature of carbon. Here we go. The first question that comes up is, carbon forms so many compounds, but why does only carbon form so many compounds? Oxygen, sulfur, nitrogen, they don't form so many compounds. Why does carbon do so? One amazing reason why carbon forms so many compounds, millions and millions of them, is catenation. What is catenation? Catenation is the ability of carbon to form carbon-carbon chains. Understood? So you can see here that this carbon atom on the left is attached to this carbon atom. This one is attached to another carbon atom, which is attached to another carbon atom, which is attached to yet another carbon atom. In this manner, carbon atoms can be attached to one another, to form chains which have hundreds or even thousands of carbon atoms. Can you believe that? Here's another example of a carbon atom chain. So carbon has this special ability to form carbon-carbon chains which go on and on and on. And that is one important reason why carbon forms so many compounds. Other atoms, like say silicon, do not have the ability to form these chains because of the size of the atom. It has been found by scientists that if an atom is small in size, in that case it can form a large chain of atoms. But if an atom is large in size, in that case the chains formed by the atoms become unstable. That is the reason, say, silicon or sulfur do not form, so many extensive atom-atom chains. Understood? So one important reason why carbon forms so many compounds is catenation, the ability of the carbon atom to form carbon-carbon chains. Understood? The second reason why carbon forms so many compounds is its tetravalency. As we already know, the valency of carbon is 4. So it can basically be attached to 4 atoms at once, isn't it? So now let's say 4 hydrogen atoms are attached to carbon. Now if we replace one of these hydrogen with fluorine, we'll get another compound. If we replace another hydrogen with fluorine, we'll get a completely different compound. If we replace 3 hydrogens with fluorine, we'll get a completely different compound. The point is that since carbon can form bonds with 4 different atoms, a huge variety of carbon compounds can be formed by a very small number of other atoms. If you take hydrogen, fluorine, chlorine, bromine, using only these atoms, more than 100 compounds can be formed. tens and tens of compounds can be formed, by placing one bromine, one fluorine and two hydrogens, or by placing two bromines and two fluorines, or by placing three fluorines and one chlorine. Using only 3-4 atoms you can form a huge number of carbon compounds because of the tetravalency of carbon, because of the fact that carbon has a valency of 4. It can be attached to 4 atoms. Understood? So this is another reason why carbon forms so many compounds. Reason number 1 is catenation, the ability of carbon to form carbon-carbon chains. Reason number 2 is tetravalency. There we go. Now generally, the study of carbon compounds is called organic chemistry. And many carbon compounds are in general called organic compounds. So before we proceed further, let's just understand what the word organic compound means. The word organic means that which has been derived from an organism. Now earlier, it was believed that carbon compounds are all derived from the human body. After all, the urine we secrete, it's a carbon compound. The food we eat is a carbon compound. Our skin is a carbon compound. So it was believed that carbon compounds are, present only in organisms. Now, of course, scientists have started synthesizing carbon compounds in laboratories as well. So generally, these days, organic compounds refer to all the compounds of carbon on this earth, except for some small exceptions like the oxides of carbon and carbonates and carbides. So basically all the compounds of carbon except for the oxides of carbon, the carbonates of carbon and the carbides of carbon are called organic compounds. Understood? So basically most carbon compounds on this earth are termed organic compounds. All the compounds that we'll study in this chapter are organic compounds. Understood? So this term basically refers to carbon compounds, organic compounds. Let's now move on and study some basic organic compounds. Well, the first category of organic compounds that we'll study is hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are carbon compounds that have only carbon and hydrogen. Understood? So you can see carbon forms so many compounds with hydrogen that a special name has been given to carbon-hydrogen compounds, hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are of two types, saturated hydrocarbons and unsaturated hydrocarbons. We'll study about all this very soon, so don't worry about these terms yet. This figure that you see on your screen represents the electron dot structure of methane. You already know that methane is CH4. It is carbon surrounded by 4 hydrogen atoms. Methane is the simplest possible hydrocarbon on this earth. Understood? That's because it has just one carbon atom, and as we already know, carbon needs 4 electrons and 4 hydrogen atoms share their 4 electrons and provide carbon with the required 4 electrons. Understood? So this is the structure of methane. This structure, the electron dot structure, is sometimes very complicated to represent. So we also represent the structure of methane by this diagram you see on the right. Understood? As you can see, we have replaced each electron pair by a single bond. So methane has 4 carbon-hydrogen single bonds, as you can clearly see, isn't it? So this is the structure of methane. What is the next simplest hydrocarbon? Well, the next simplest hydrocarbon is C2H6 or ethane. This is the electron dot structure of ethane. I know it sounds complicated, but it's actually quite simple. You see, methane has 1 carbon atom, ethane has 2. The difference, between ethane and methane is that each carbon atom in ethane is bonded to 1 other carbon atom and 3 other hydrogen atoms. Understood? See, carbon requires 4 electrons, isn't it? So 3 hydrogens share their electrons with carbon and 1 other carbon atom shares its electron with carbon. Understood? So basically 1 carbon atom here is surrounded by 3 hydrogens and 1 other carbon atom. This is the structure of ethane. As you can see, since there are 6 hydrogen atoms and 2 carbon atoms, the formula for ethane is C2H6. This is the structure of ethane. As you can see, ethane has 1 carbon-carbon single bond and it has 6 carbon-hydrogen single bonds. Understood? Carbon surrounded by 3 hydrogens and 1 other carbon atom. This is ethane for you. Now, can you yourself predict, what the structure of the next possible hydrocarbon will be? The next more complicated hydrocarbon? Well, the next hydrocarbon is C3H8 or propane. This is the structure of propane. Can you see what we've done? We've simply added one more carbon atom, to the carbon chain. Methane had one carbon atom, ethane had two, and now this third carbon compound is propane. It has three carbon atoms. In this case again, we've just put three carbon atoms in a chain, and then we've added hydrogen atoms depending on the valency of carbon, that is 4. You see, the first carbon has 3 hydrogens attached to it. The second carbon has just 2 hydrogens attached to it because it has one carbon on either side. So it gets shared electrons from 2 carbons already. So it only needs 2 more electrons, and so it needs only 2 hydrogen bonds. Understood? So it has 2 hydrogens. The third carbon again has 3 hydrogen atoms. What is important is that the valency of carbon is 4 in each case. If you have to draw the structure of any hydrocarbon with say 3 carbons or 4 carbons or 5 carbons, simply draw a carbon chain and then fulfill the valency of carbon. Understood? Make sure that carbon has 4 bonds. Carbon will always have 4 bonds because its valency is 4. So that's the simple rule to draw the structure of a hydrocarbon. You can see that the first carbon has 3 hydrogen atoms, second 2, and third has 3 hydrogen atoms. So C3H8 is propane. You must remember this name. What about the next more complicated organic compound? The next hydrocarbon? The next hydrocarbon is called butane. Again, all that we have done is that we've added yet another carbon to the chain, isn't it? Propane had 3 carbon atoms. We've added one more carbon atom here. Of course, all the bonds in butane are also single bonds. And again, you can see that the valency of carbon is 4 in each case. Isn't it? Carbon has 4 bonds. All the carbons in butane also have 4 bonds. The first carbon has 3 hydrogen atoms and it is attached to one carbon atom. The second and third carbon are both attached to 2 carbon atoms and 2 hydrogen atoms. The fourth carbon atom has 3 hydrogens attached to it. So basically we've drawn a carbon chain and we've fulfilled the valency of carbon. Understood? So that's the structure of butane for you. Now this is a series of hydrocarbons, isn't it? We're just increasing the number of carbon atoms in the chain and we're seeing that we're getting different compounds. We had methane, ethane, propane, and now with 4 carbon atoms we have butane. Now all these carbon compounds, that we've studied till now come under a special category called alkanes. Understood? So methane, butane, propane, ethane, all are alkanes. As you can see, CH4, C2H6, C3H8, C4H10, these are alkanes. One fascinating fact that you must remember is the formula of alkanes. The chemical formula of alkanes is CnH2n plus 2. This is an important formula. N here represents the number of carbon atoms. Take a look at the formula of methane. Methane has one carbon atom, so its formula is C1H2 into 1 plus 2, that is CH4. Ethane has 2 carbon atoms, so its formula is C2H2 into 2 plus 2, that is H6. Propane has the formula C3H8, C3H2 into 3 plus 2, that is C3H8. So all alkanes have the chemical formula CnH2n plus 2. Another important fact is that alkanes are also called saturated hydrocarbons. You see, they are hydrocarbons which do not have any double bond. Hydrocarbons which have only single bonds in them and which do not have any double bond are called saturated hydrocarbons. Understood? Carbon-carbon single bond is present in alkanes. As you can see, the names of all alkanes end in ane, A-N-E. So we have methane, ethane, propane, butane, and so on. The name always ends in ane. Understood? So this is what alkanes are all about. Alkanes are hydrocarbons with the standard formula CnH2n plus 2. They have a single carbon-carbon bond and they are saturated hydrocarbons. What will happen, if an alkane has 5 carbon atoms? then it will be called pentane. An alkane with 6 carbon atoms will be hexane. Then you get heptane, octane, nonane, decane. All these might seem very difficult, but don't worry. You don't have to remember all the names, but basically all alkanes have ane in them. Understood? That's what you must remember. Here's a look at pentane, C5H12. As you can see, it has 5 carbon atoms. Pentane, that's the name here. Again, there are only single bonds. Here's hexane. As you can see, the formula for hexane is C6H2 into 6 plus 2. 2 into 6 is 12 and 2 into 6 plus 2 is 14. So the formula for hexane is C6H14. This is hexane for you. Again, there are only carbon-carbon single bonds. So that was the first category of hydrocarbons. It's called alkanes. Understood? Let's now move on to the second category of hydrocarbons.